The courtroom was packed, the air thick with judgment before a single word was spoken. A young black man stood quietly before the bench, calm, composed, and strangely confident. But the moment the judge's gavel struck, everything turned hostile. Insults flew. Then came the slap, sharp, public, humiliating. The crowd gasped, cameras flashed, and the man didn't flinch. He simply looked up, meeting the judge's eyes with a silence that spoke louder than any defense. Because in a few moments the entire court, and the world, would learn who he really was, and just how powerful the truth could be. His name was Michael Grant, a man known in Washington's highest circles as one of the most brilliant prosecutors ever to walk the halls of justice. But today, he wasn't wearing his badge or his tailored suit. He was simply a black man in casual clothes, standing in a small-town courtroom hundreds of miles from D.C. He had driven home to visit his aging mother, a quiet trip meant for rest, not confrontation. That morning, a traffic stop had changed everything. A broken taillight, an impatient officer, and a cascade of assumptions. The police didn't ask for identification, they saw only color. When he tried to explain, they cut him off. By the time he reached the courthouse, he was already labeled as disrespectful and uncooperative. Inside, the judge, Harold Benton, a man with decades of unchecked power, barely looked at the case file. He saw only a black defendant and a chance to make an example. The locals whispered that Benton kept order his own way, and in his courtroom no one dared question him. Michael could have ended it in seconds by showing his credentials, his White House access card, his federal ID. But he didn't. He wanted to see how deep the prejudice went when status wasn't visible. He wanted to understand firsthand the system he'd been fighting to reform. As he waited for the hearing to begin, he noticed the smug faces of officers lining the back wall, the quiet snickers from the gallery, the arrogance behind the bench. Still he stayed silent, almost serene, as if he already knew that justice had a strange way of revealing itself, even in the darkest rooms. From the very first moment Judge Benton opened his mouth, the courtroom's balance tilted. His tone wasn't that of a neutral authority. It was a declaration of control. Disrespect to an officer, reckless endangerment, failure to comply. The words rolled off his tongue like practiced accusations, not legal charges. He didn't even glance at Michael's paperwork before shaking his head, as if the verdict was already written in his mind. The officer stood behind Michael, arms crossed, smirking. One of them, the one who had pulled him over, leaned against the wall with satisfaction. To them, this was routine. Another troublemaker being taught a lesson. Michael's mother sat trembling in the gallery, clutching her purse and whispering prayers under her breath. She knew her son, patient, calm, disciplined, but she also knew the danger of being right while black in a place that didn't care for truth. When Michael tried to speak, Benton slammed his gavel. "Silence! You'll speak when spoken to," he barked. The gavel echoed like thunder across the walls, drawing a few murmurs of approval from those who had seen this spectacle before. Michael's heart pounded, not from fear but from restraint. His instincts as a prosecutor urged him to object, to demand due process, to cite the Constitution that he'd defended countless times. But he bit his tongue. The point wasn't to win an argument. It was to witness the full ugliness of unchecked bias. The officer's report was riddled with contradictions, but Benton didn't notice. He never asked questions. He simply nodded through each accusation. Resisting arrest. Aggressive tone. Failure to show ID. When Michael's attorney tried to intervene, the judge dismissed her with a sneer. "Counsel, if your client behaved himself, we wouldn't be here. Sit down." Laughter rippled through the room. It wasn't just a trial. It was theater. A cruel performance staged to reaffirm power. Then came the breaking point. Benton rose from his seat, pointing at Michael as if lecturing a child. "Men like you think you're above the law. You come into my court with arrogance, thinking you can talk your way out. Well, not today." Michael looked straight ahead. No reaction, no anger, just silence. The judge took a step closer, slamming his hand on the desk. The courtroom fell deathly quiet. And then, without warning, the slap came. A sharp crack that stunned the entire room. Gasps filled the air. The bailiff froze. Even the officers accustomed to Benton's cruelty looked uneasy. Michael didn't move. He didn't raise a hand. He simply adjusted his tie. An instinctive gesture, calm and deliberate, and looked up at the man who had just humiliated him in front of everyone. In that stillness, something shifted. It wasn't rage, it was control. The kind of control that comes from knowing truth is on your side, even when power is not. And as Benton turned away, muttering about respect and discipline, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the hallway, firm, confident, and purposeful. No one in that room knew that those footsteps carried the authority to change everything. The courtroom doors burst open with a force that silenced even the whispers. 2 federal marshals strode in, their badges glinting under the fluorescent lights. Behind them walked a woman in a navy suit, the Deputy Attorney General herself. Her face was grave, her voice cold and clear. "Judge Benton," she said, holding up a document stamped with the White House seal. "We need to speak with your defendant. Immediately." Confusion swept the room. Benton's arrogance faltered, replaced by irritation. "This man is under my jurisdiction. You'll wait until my court." "Your court?" she interrupted sharply. "This man is Michael Grant, Chief Federal Prosecutor for the Eastern District and Senior Counsel to the President of the United States." The silence was absolute. Even the hum of the ceiling fan seemed to stop. Benton blinked, his jaw tightening as the realization hit him. Every officer who had mocked, arrested, or restrained Michael suddenly stood frozen, the color draining from their faces. Michael finally rose, calmly, slowly. The same composure he'd held through humiliation now felt commanding. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed his White House identification on the judge's desk. The gold emblem caught the light, unmistakable and unforgiving. "You wanted respect," he said softly, his tone steady but heavy with truth. "You just never thought it could come from someone who looks like me." Benton stammered, reaching for excuses, procedure, misunderstanding, protocol. But the words stumbled and died in his throat. The marshal stepped forward, handing him an order from Washington: suspension pending investigation for abuse of judicial authority. Gasps erupted. Reporters, who had come expecting another routine hearing, now scrambled for footage. The same courtroom that had mocked Michael minutes earlier was now witnessing its own reckoning. Michael didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He simply turned to his mother, offering a quiet nod. A silent promise kept. The truth had revealed itself, and this time the gavel would fall in his favor. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within days, the video from the courtroom spread across the nation. A single clip of a judge striking a man who turned out to be one of the highest-ranking prosecutors in America. Social media ignited with outrage. News anchors replayed the footage on loop, asking how a man who defended justice for a living could be denied it in a courtroom meant to protect it. Judge Benton was suspended pending investigation. The officers involved faced disciplinary hearings, their smirks now replaced with fear. Yet for Michael, the victory was far more personal and far heavier. He had exposed the truth, but he also felt the weight of knowing it took his title, not his humanity, to be treated with dignity. Back in Washington, colleagues congratulated him, calling him brave for staying silent, for letting the prejudice play out until it revealed itself completely. But Michael didn't feel brave. He felt tired. Tired of a world where respect had to be earned through power, not decency. He visited his mother one quiet evening, sitting with her on the porch as the sun sank behind the trees. She looked at him with pride and pain intertwined. "You proved your point," she said softly, "but I wish you didn't have to." Michael nodded. He knew what she meant. No title, no badge, no courtroom victory could erase the deeper truth, that every day, Countless others without his status face the same injustice, without the cameras, without the redemption. Weeks later, Benton's name was struck from the bench, his legacy tainted by the very arrogance he'd mistaken for authority. Michael returned to his work at the White House determined more than ever to fight the system from within, not for himself, but for every man and woman who never got the chance to be heard. Because sometimes justice isn't about punishment, it's about revelation, showing the world what it refuses to see. And as Michael walked past the courtroom steps one last time, one question lingered in the air. How many truths go unheard, simply because of the color of the one who speaks them?